I think this is unprecedented. On Saturday night, President Trump via Truth Social, 7:44 p.m. If Iran doesn't fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So I thought it only appropriate that today's poll question would ask, what's the most likely outcome from Trump's ultimatum tonight? I gave four choices. One was Iran opens the strait. Only 2% of the vote for that. Major escalation of the war, 40.06%. The U.S. carries out strikes, 16.29%. The plurality, Trump backs down, 41.60%. How many voted? As of the time we pulled it, 976. Again, not scientific, but pretty damn interesting. A plurality thought that the president was going to back down. Then came this morning. This morning at 7:05 a.m., new message via Truth Social. I'm pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had over the last 2 days very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East, based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will, I'm reading it literally, WITCH, but okay, which will continue throughout the week. I've instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period. Now the poll question becomes, will these talks be successful? It's all perfect fodder for a conversation with David Sanger. He is the White House and national security correspondent for the New York Times and author of New Cold Wars, which will be released in paperback form within the next 2 weeks. David, in the print edition of the New York Times today, I'm looking at your column, Trump Eyes and Iran Exit, but will he take it? It's all about what's been transpiring, and now this new news. I'm eager to ask you about that development. What do you make of the president saying now, I'm putting 5 more days on the clock?
Well, he needed some more time, Michael. I think he recognized that your poll numbers were probably roughly right. The chances that the Iranians were just going to say, oh, we're opening up the strait was pretty limited. What did you say? You had 2%?
2% thought that. 2. Yep.
Yeah. I'd love to talk to the people in that 2% and ask them why they thought the Iranians would do that. But in any case, I think it was pretty evident that wasn't going to happen. And even if it did, the shippers might not even trust it enough to send their cargo, mostly oil, but also helium, fertilizer, through the strait. So then the question came, if the deadline passed, the president had a choice of bombing those energy sites, and that would be, among other things, a violation of the Geneva Convention. I'm not sure, based on his interview with us in January, how much he was concerned about the international law aspects of this, but that would be a fact, or he would have to back down. So he needed something that would buy him some time. Time also allows these 4,500 Marines who are coming, some from Okinawa, some from California, to get in place if he needs them to open the canal.
You spoke in your analysis of either there's no strategy, that's what the critics see, or those who are more charitable toward the president say perhaps it's all strategic ambiguity. All I know is that in the last couple of days, 1 minute we're sending more Marines. Then the president's talking of winding down the military operation, then the threat of obliteration. Now, 5 more days goes on the clock. No strategy or strategic ambiguity?
Could be a little bit of both. I mean, I think that at the beginning of this conflict, the president was quite persuaded that the Iranians would simply surrender. And he asked many of his aides at various points, why haven't they just relented on all of this? And as one person who dealt with him on this put it to me, it was as if there had been no discussion beforehand of 3,000 years of Iranian history, right? But no reason to believe that the Iranians were going to declare a unconditional surrender as the president demanded on March 6th. Now, later on, you saw the White House say, well, the president will decide whether or not there was unconditional surrender, sort of ignoring the fact that surrender's got two parts to it, right? It's got the we've run out of capability and we agree to stop hostilities. Um, the president may be able to declare that they are militarily defeated, and he's done so in recent days. He said the Navy has been sunk, the Air Force isn't operating, the many of the missiles have been destroyed. That's all true, but it has not stopped them from their ability to close the strait. And that's his fundamental problem now. He needs some strategic ambiguity here to give him some time to figure out a solution to the strait problem, because that's what's driving the price of oil and that's what's driving the market instability.
In your analysis, you say foreign leaders, diplomats, and U.S. officials who have spoken with the president said that in the first week he voiced expectations that Iran would capitulate. There's an analysis on the front page of the print edition of the Times today by your colleagues. Headline: Israel planned to ignite mass uprising in Iran, but it failed to emerge. The gist of this story is to say that the Mossad convinced Bibi Netanyahu and then made a presentation to the administration, David Barnea, the Mossad chief, that if in fact the attack would begin, that there'd be an uprising from the Iranian people. That hasn't happened. Did they miscalculate that?
I think the Mossad was working, and David Barnea was working from a optimistic view, Michael, that somehow or another the Iranian people would see, as soon as the supreme leader had been killed, an opportunity to rise up. But they don't have any arms. They don't have any organization. They don't have any training. And of course, they were petrified and had to stay inside their homes because Tehran was being bombed, and so were many other cities across Iran. So I think this was a bit of optimism that I think Prime Minister Netanyahu used to help sell the entire operation to President Trump. By a week or a week and a half in, we heard President Trump say, well, it would be very dangerous for them to go out and do that. I think even he was walking away from it. And if you looked at the Friday Truth Social, seems an era ago, he never even mentioned regime change as one of the goals anymore. And in fact, that the essence of the piece I wrote over the weekend was basically to say, if he left now, it would be with the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, still in command, with a weakened, injured supreme leader, but one still there, with the nuclear material still where it was, and with the country essentially working from the same regime, but with fewer arms.
Right. As you report, the objectives have shifted. Quote, his latest list of those objectives left out a few of his previous goals and watered down others. He made no mention of defeating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which appears to remain in power, along with Khamenei, who succeeded his father as supreme leader. Though he has yet to be seen or heard in public, Trump also omitted any message to the Iranian people, whom he told only 3 weeks ago, when we are finished, take over your government, it will be yours to take. So as best you can glean now, David Sanger, what would be the objective that would give him the exit ramp, he, the president, that he seems to be looking for?
A few things. First, if he can get shipping going through the strait again, that would be the most important. That wasn't even on the original list because they had not really imagined that the Iranians would be successful in closing the strait. In fact, they had guessed that Iran wouldn't try to close it at all because it would bottle up Iran's own fuel. The second thing is, I think, some kind of agreement on the nuclear fuel. The original demand that the Trump administration was making in negotiations before the war broke out was that Iran ship all of its nuclear material out of the country, which is what happened to 97% of the material back in 2015 under the Obama era agreement that the president called so weak. Now, I think from reading the Friday posting, it's possible he would agree to keep some of it there under the watchful eye of the International Atomic Energy Agency and others, though he was not explicit on that topic. So I think he is looking at this point for a more limited set of accomplishments that he could declare as a victory and get himself out of this, and then say accurately that he has deeply weakened the Iranian regime, and then hope that the people would rise up 6 months from now, a year from now, who knows?
You've covered 5 American presidents. You covered Donald Trump, President Trump, for the New York Times. You spent, I guess it was just a month ago, I remember speaking with you about spending 3 hours in his presence, both in the Oval Office and in the White House generally. I'm
Well,
just
4.5, but yeah,
4.5. Okay.
about right.
So the point is, you know the man well. How will he attempt to sell this if the status quo is the end of the war?
That the military had shown a huge ability to defeat the Iranians, that they no longer had the ability to project power beyond Iran and attack anybody else. And I suspect until the Iranians rebuild, that'll probably be roughly correct. The question is, will he have achieved the other objectives, which is change the regime, support the protesters, and solve the nuclear problem? And there is an argument to be made that, in fact, the nuclear problem could come back in a big way if the fuel is still there, because if you are the Iranians and you're watching what just happened to your country, you may well conclude, if you're the Iranian leadership, gee, why did this not happen to the North Koreans? Because they had already raced for the bomb and gotten it. So I think it's very possible that a new Iranian leadership, if it remains the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the clerics, may well conclude that it was a mistake of the previous regime not to try to get a bomb. So I think that's an issue that we're going to have to go deal with in the future, that we may have incentivized them to race for a weapon.
Is Netanyahu on the same page with Trump, and does that matter?
So far, I would say that they started on the same page at the beginning and diverted quickly. That the Israeli goal at this point is to leave the Iranian government in complete rubble and the place in chaos so that it can no longer target Israel. And they're much less sensitive to the question of whether or not oil moves through the strait and what happens to oil prices and so forth. And so the divisions you've seen in recent weeks have all been over those topics. The Israelis, of course, attacked the South Pars oil field. The president probably knew about that in advance. He now says he told them not to do it and that they won't do it in the future. Well, that was a prime example of a huge operation, and a significant one, that the U.S. was against and the Israelis went for anyway. And we've had some earlier examples of that as well.
This posting on Truth Social came just before our conversation. I assume you don't have any reporting on the nature of these talks that have taken place over the last 2 days that the president is referring to.
We don't have much. We're trying to find out if there were actual direct talks or indirect ones, which would be more likely. That maybe through, say, Oman, which has acted as mediator during the diplomacy that failed leading up to the attack on February 28th. And the question is, was this just signaling, or was there real discussion? Or is the president just trying to buy some time for the Marines to get there and for him to think of a way out of the threat that he issued on Saturday night that you read? Because I think the more he thought about that, the more he probably thought that threat didn't leave him very good options either way.
Well, if I go back to where I began by explaining to David Sanger and to the audience that I had to withdraw my poll question because it now was dated, but I take note of the fact that 41.60%, when asked what's the most likely outcome of Trump's ultimatum to Iran, a plurality said that Trump would back down. Some will perceive this as the president having backed down.
Well, the Iranians already turned out a statement to that effect. And I'm not sure that was so wise because it's sort of waving a red flag in front of Donald Trump, who's a little bit sensitive to, phrases like taco, that Trump always chickens out.
Right.
And he got quite angry when a reporter asked him about that a number of months ago. That was in a completely different context. It was in the context of tariffs. But I think the next 5 days, the question is there a real discussion going on here? Do the Iranians also feel like they need a way out because of the huge destruction that's been done to their infrastructure, their cities? We think well more than 1,000 Iranians have been killed so far. The number might be much higher. We have very little way of knowing. And, all wars end sometime. And they usually end when both sides see no advantage and are exhausted and just don't think the cost is worth it. Frequently, that point is well past what you and I might think that point is. I mean, you and I might think Ukraine and Russia hit that point a year and a half ago, but obviously the war continues. So the question here is, can both sides figure out a way that they can claim they emerged from this at least with their dignity intact, if not victorious?
Speaking of sensitivities, from Truth Social, the president over the weekend, the United States has blown Iran off the map, and yet their lightweight analyst David Sanger says that I haven't met my goals. Yes, I have, and weeks ahead of schedule. Their leadership is gone. Their Navy and Air Force are dead. They have absolutely no defense, and they want to make a deal. I don't. We are weeks ahead of schedule, just like their incompetent election coverage of me. The failing New York Times always gets it wrong. President DJT. Your response?
Well, I've been called a lot worse than a lightweight over the time. So, the fact that you, Michael, are willing to have me come on to discuss this, I'll take as a vote of confidence. But, it's really interesting where he says he doesn't want a deal, and that was Saturday night. And this morning's tweet suggests he wants a deal.
David, how will he be the next time you're in his company? Because my impression is that it like water off a duck, I think, as they used to say. Yeah. He minute to minute, he'll criticize you today and answer your question tomorrow as if it never happened.
I don't know, but in previous cases where we have had reporters who he has at various moments taken off after on Truth Social, when we've gone in to see him, he's acted like it never happened.
Right. I mean, you're never dead to Donald Trump until you're really gone. You look at how many people. I'm not thinking of journalists. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what I really took from that message, Michael, was he's a loyal reader of the New York Times. He has been since his time in New York. And all I hope is that he has the full combo subscription, print, digital, maybe games and cooking. I mean, who knows?
The paperback edition of the book, New Cold Wars, within 2 weeks. It's excellent. I wish you good things with it, and thank you for coming back to the program.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be with you.
So, Seth, I said that you're a former naval officer and former Deputy Undersecretary of Navy. Tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get into your opinion, so that as people hear what you have to say, they can evaluate the background that you bring to the table.
Well, I was also director of international broadcasting for the U.S. government in the W administration, and taught at at a Center for Eastern European former Warsaw Pact military officers in Germany. The object was to, after the end of the Cold War, to give them a better understanding of how defense and national security planning works in a modern liberal democracy.
You began the essay. You began the essay in the Wall Street Journal saying the Trump administration finds itself in a larger war than it expected, facing a profoundly hard decision. President Trump must put boots on the ground to open the Strait of Hormuz and demonstrate the unquestionable supremacy of American power. If he fails, his legacy will be one of American collapse. If he succeeds, he will have prepared the U.S. for an intense period of competition over the next decade. I'm so eager to have you here today because now the news that the 82nd Airborne, in some fashion, is deploying. Do you think he's about to do what you recommended in the journal?
I certainly hope so. It's very hard to tell the difference between his statements and what he does and his negotiating position. So speculation about that is exactly what it is, speculation.
So amplify on your opinion. Why do you think it's necessary to put boots on the ground in Iran?
Because as long as the Iranians control their side of the Strait of Hormuz, they will be able to, although with difficulty, but it doesn't take much, they will be able to launch drones at shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, even use artillery fire and short-range ballistic missiles, short-range any kinds of missiles. So if they are permitted to maintain their that swath of land that sits on their shore and on the coast of the Strait of Hormuz, shipping through the strait will be in danger.
Some think this is a bluff and that actually soon the president will fold his tent. You write, halting now would be a cataclysmic mistake with repercussions well beyond the Middle East. Explain.
It would be added to Iraq and Afghanistan and interpreted as a further sign of the United States' inability to see through something that it had begun with profound security implications, not only for us, but for the entire world.
Your focus is on the Strait of Hormuz, and I'm thinking to myself, going through the same mental exercise, what needs to happen for the United States to leave with dignity, honor, and success? And for me, it's the enriched uranium, because it's been a moving target, as I said, in terms of the objective of the administration, but the one constant for Netanyahu and Israel has been they cannot have a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. And the whole premise here was that there was an imminent strike that we needed to defend against. Well, if we don't leave with the enriched uranium, can it be categorized as a success even if the Strait of Hormuz is open?
If the enriched uranium is found and removed from them, and that regime remains in place, they will continue their efforts to build a nuclear weapon. It will take time, but that's not going to stop them. So the regime change is the only way, and in a direction that's positive, is the only way to assure that the Iranian clerics and mullahs or the IRGC does not start up the nuclear program the moment we're out of there.
You wrote in the journal, the only way to accomplish our goals is with a reasonable chance of success by putting boots on the ground. The U.S. has trained and planned for this contingency for decades. At the helm today are military officers, General Dan Kane, Admiral Frank Bradley, Admiral Brad Cooper, who understand the precise capabilities of U.S. Special Operations Forces and the advantages of automated targeting. Mr. Trump can trust these men to see this through. Do you think the American people would be supportive of boots on the ground? I imagine you wrote this piece trying to bolster that case, but do you think that the American public has the stomach for troops being in harm's way on the ground in Iran?
Absolutely. If it were explained to them. That has so far been the weakness of the administration's policy. It has not offered a clear, rational explanation and repeated it again and again about why we are there, what we're doing, and what our goal is. That has yet to happen. The Secretary of State has tried in his own way, but the president doesn't like being upstaged, and the president, his strength is not in his explanation. His strength is in his conviction and his decisiveness and his willingness to do the right thing on this particular issue. What's missing is presidential encouragement, presidential speeches, talking directly to the American people and saying, what are we doing and why are we doing it and what do we expect and what are the consequences if we fail or do nothing?
Okay,
That's missing.
Seth Cropsey, give me the elevator pitch. Give me the Cliff's Note version before you leave me. What is the argument that you think the administration should be making, the short version of it?
Yeah, the short version is that this is that the Iranian regime is a fanatic, ideological regime that has said for 47 years that it wants to destroy the United States and has acted similarly, killing American servicemen, trying to assassinate President Trump, building nuclear weapons, expanding the range of their ballistic missiles. You have to take that seriously. And if you don't, you're in trouble. When somebody says they want to kill you, you ought to take it seriously, especially if they're building the weapons to do it.
Seth, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Michael.
You got it. Okay, gang, the poll question, the Wednesday poll question. Agree or disagree? The war should not end until Iran's enriched uranium is under U.S. or international control. The war should not end until Iran's enriched uranium is under U.S. or international control.
Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
Mark Halpern wears a lot of hats. One of them is the editor of the Wide World of News newsletter, which I look forward to every day. It begins this way. Donald Trump is willing to take a peace deal that would be, in effect, a massive surrender from the Iranians. Short of that, he seems determined to win the war decisively with overwhelming force. And then Mark goes on to give us an insight into what he believes the president might be thinking now. Can you summarize, for the benefit of those who have not seen the Wide World of News, the gist of what you think he might be thinking right now?
That it's a false choice to try to understand where his head is at, to say does he want a deal or not a deal. He'd prefer a great deal. If he can get a great deal without any more violence, he would take that. But there's a big gap between what the Iranians are saying the deal should be and what the Americans say it should be. Moments ago on Iranian state TV, they said they reject the U.S. premise of the U.S. deal. And so the second track, if he can't get a great deal, is to go down in history as the person who disarmed Iran. It doesn't necessarily mean regime change, but it does mean elimination of the nuclear program, not setting it back, not degrading it, but eliminating it and doing substantial damage to Iran's ability to be the greatest state sponsor of terrorism and do a great deal of pushback on Iran's missile program and Navy. So one thing we know about Donald Trump is he's a creature of habit. And historically, when he moves significant military assets, both human beings and hardware, into place, he uses them. He doesn't move them just for intimidation or for show. And right now, the U.S. military buildup, including ground forces, continues to be expanding in the region. So I think that people it's obvious the press gets obsessed with process. And the process around a potential peace deal is taking up a lot of the conversation now. But I don't think we should lose sight of the prospect that the president, with the Israelis and maybe others, could engage in a pretty massive escalation of what has already been a pretty escalated conflict.
And you conveyed all of that, but not in the staid Mark Halpern, I went to school in Boston manner, but rather loaded with bluster and personality. Essentially, you took on Trump's persona and wrote it in his voice. Fair?
Yeah, I mean, there's the Wide World of News concierge coverage newsletter is meant to be informative and entertaining. And so I did my best in creative writing to lay out how Trump's literal stream of consciousness thought process might be going. And part of that is he loves how he can so easily distract people. He can say the war is over, and he can say, the Iranians really want a deal. And all of that could be a cover and a pretext to distract everybody, including the Iranians themselves, from what might be a significant military escalation.
Okay, and in that vein of being entertaining, I think you will, I hope, appreciate this reading by President Trump of Mark Halpern's Wide World of News.
I mean, look at them. Look at them, these geniuses, the traders with their little ergonomic chairs and their Bloomberg terminals glowing like tanning beds. The private equity smarty pants with their models, their projections, their downside scenarios. The media with their cheap moral authority purchased wholesale from a clearance rack. People are so dumb, historically dumb, evolutionarily disappointing. They can't see what I'm doing. They just follow the bouncing ball of what I say in public every day. I can manipulate them more easily than a grandfather manipulates a little bitty toddler. And I respect grandparents, tremendous people, but they've got tricks, candy, nostalgia, emotional leverage. I've got all three, plus I have nuclear submarines too.
Mark, those are all the words that you wrote for President Trump. By the way, I think he did Sean Farish a hell of a job with that voice.
Is that Sean Ferris or is that AI?
Yeah, that's Sean Farish who did that. And we tracked him down. Yeah, I just thought it was brilliant.
Did you have him do the whole thing?
We did not have him do the whole. Hey, we're working on a budget here, okay? We did not have.
Okay. All right.
No, I'm kidding.
Was it AI or was it Sean Ferris?
No, it was Sean Farish. We reached out for him today, and he had a conflict, and Dan said, "All right, leave me a voicemail and read Halpern's piece." And that was the minute worth that he gave us.
That's awesome that you did that. I'm a huge fan of his Trump imitation. That is so awesome.
Yeah, we'll get it to you. You can link to it in tomorrow's Wide World of News.
Please do that. That'd be spectacular. Thank you for that. It's
a
pleasure to listen to have that guy read my stuff.
Totally. I felt the same way, and I knew you would feel that. So, it's more seriously though. I thought what you wrote was so convincing in saying people just don't get it. I am manipulating them. They've got their eye on whatever ball I'm bouncing on a particular day, and I'm playing for bigger and long-term stakes. And further along, you say that he and Bibi have kind of worked this all out, that they know and they're in there for the long term. Speak to the serious side of that.
Well, again, when I write, I often will write things like fake memos or fake stream of consciousness in the newsletter. The point of it is to take my reporting and weave it throughout. So this is not all made up, right? This is based on what my sources are telling me. And sometimes a source won't say something explicitly, but if you're familiar with the source and what I call body language, you can kind of read into where they're at. And Donald Trump didn't do this for ego, and he didn't do this because it would be popular, because it's not. And he didn't do it because it was a safe move. He really does believe, and he's talked about it literally for decades, well before he was a politician, that it's not responsible for the United States to allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. It's too big a threat to the world. So it just makes logical sense. Either Iran has to agree to the U.S. terms and hand over everything about their nuclear program, the existing enriched uranium and the capacity to do more, or he's going to continue to use the military might of the United States to bring them to heel with the help of the Israelis. So it's not. I don't think it's the thing I wrote. It's made a lot of waves in some quarters, but to me it's not a mystery. He doesn't. He started this with some specific objectives. And number one is to eliminate their nuclear program. And if you look at their list of 15 provisions in their proposed deal to end the conflict, about half of them have to do with the nuclear program.
Bibi and I secretly decided together before the war, very quiet, very sophisticated, like two men discussing golf handicaps, except the handicap is existential, that we were going to pursue these extremists to the gates of hell, really beyond the gates of hell. Do you see, and now I'm tapping into Mark Halpern, not through satire and humor, but your spidey sense and your reporting. Do you see them still being on the same page?
Well, I do right now, and if my reporting that I leaned into in the newsletter is correct, they're very much on the same page. However, the difference is I think the president would stop this without regime change, and I think Bibi thinks regime change is essential. That if you leave in power the people who have lied and threatened and murdered and kept their own people in check, if you leave a version of those people in place, you're asking for trouble. You're asking to have to deal with all this again. And I think Bibi's view is we've started, let's finish the whole thing. And I'm pretty sure the president would stop well short of that.
Mark, politically speaking, can it be shut down now, or does President Trump, politically speaking, need something else? Need regime change? Need seizure of enriched uranium? Need the opening of the Strait of Hormuz?
He needs two of those. I think the strait has to be open, and the nuclear program has to be seriously in check. What the exact contours of that are, I don't know, but I don't believe either politically or substantively he can stop short of those two things. So I would cast it respectfully less about the politics of it than about the mission and about the reality of what it means to stop. If they can open the strait and they can have a beat on the nuclear material, I think they can stop. But without those two things, I don't believe they can. Now, they can negotiate those two things, or they could try to solve those two things militarily.
You might find, I hope you'll find this interesting. My daily poll questions are unscientific, but I hope provocative. I know they're good fodder for conversation. I'm often in the minority. The results skew left of center. But tell me what you make of this. 25,087 have voted so far. Agree or disagree, the war should not end until Iran's enriched uranium is under U.S. or international control. Right now, getting the approval, round numbers, of 54% who are responding.
Well, I think that I'm less interested, not just in your poll question, but in polling generally on this topic, only because there's a lot of caveats and complexities here. I think really no one should give that answer, really, and I don't think too many people would if they understood the full complexities of it. I think it's easy to say no to that or yes to that. Either way, if you don't know all the facts, and of course, a lot of people in America today, if Donald Trump's for it, they're against it.
True.
And I think that drives some of this. But this is so fast moving and so complicated, and honestly, so poorly explained by the administration. They haven't really laid out why they're doing all of this, that I think it's difficult to credit, again, not just what you do, but polls on this matter because of those complexities.
So the midterms, relative to the midterms, you have the president saying, look, politically, I'm rolling the dice. I was going to suffer in the midterms anyway, and then further along, but if we win it, and my generals think we will, tremendous generals, beautiful medals, then the polling, the economy, and everything else will turn around.
Talk to any Republican consultant doing work this cycle, and they'll tell you it's very grim right now. The president's approval rating is down, and there are a lot of races that are in play that people didn't think would be in play on the House side in particular. However, you could see this ending with success for the president. You could see this ending in a way, and Democrats, with few exceptions, including the senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, have been very down on this and very despairing of it being started, very much saying the president is doing something doomed. So I think that those who say, well, he's hurting his party for the midterms, I think they were in a world of hurt for the midterms, and this could end in a way that would be a win-win for him. It could be achieving his military objectives and national security objectives and helping him politically revive the economy, if it goes very well, and he's willing to take that risk.
But right now, gas is $4 a gallon, and his approval, according to Reuters Ipsos, which just came out today, is at 36%, the lowest point for Trump 2.0. So paint the picture. I know what the status quo is, but before you leave me, paint the picture for what success looks like for President Trump politically.
Before May 1st or May 15th, Iran has, through more military action or not, lost its nuclear program, its Navy, its ballistic missile capacity, its capacity to be the greatest state sponsor of terror. And there's a government in place that is either friendly to the West or in no threat to the West and to Israel, to its neighbors in the region. And oil, as the president and Scott Bessent have predicted and Secretary Wright have predicted, is back down to pre-war levels or even maybe lower. And then you put the cherry on top that the United States has found some way to benefit economically from Iranian oil. These are not in hand, to say the least, but I don't think they're far-fetched. I don't think it's impossible. We see through a glass darkly regarding the current strengths and capacities of the Iranian government, but it's entirely possible. People say it's unprecedented to have regime change with air power only. And I say it's also unprecedented to have this many leaders of a country killed. I can't find an historical parallel in the modern history of the leadership of a country so wiped out. And maybe that does lead to regime change.
Mark Halpern, we appreciate you every Wednesday in the third hour of the program. Thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
I was surprised by yesterday's poll result at Smerconish.com. 34,430 voted. Agree or disagree, the war should not end until Iran's enriched uranium is under U.S. or international control. Here's the surprising part, at least to me. 53.08% agreed with that statement. Why my surprise? Because it's the more hawkish answer. Those usually win out when I ask about Ukraine and Russia, but they have not been winning out when I ask about what we're doing in Iran. Quick update, and then we welcome Admiral James Stavridis back to the program. Breaking news earlier this morning, the Israeli military killed the naval commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in an overnight attack. This is the individual who has played a pivotal role in shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Second update, this deadline looms. Remember, it had been Monday, 7:44 p.m. Eastern time, because that's when President Trump, if you go back, it was actually Saturday night, initially said, I'm giving them just 48 hours until this minute in time, until all hell was going to break loose. He then extended it 5 days. By my math, that would be Saturday night. But the White House seems to be treating it as if it's tomorrow night. Third, yesterday we were questioning whether there indeed were talks taking place. At least we know that there's an exchange of proposals. The Trump administration says they put forth a 15-point plan. The Pakistanis apparently acting as intermediaries. Iran has dismissed that plan. They've come up with a 5-point plan of their own. They say it includes an end to the fighting and the end to assassination of their officials, that it guarantees no other war started against it. They want reparations, and they want Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, the plans move forward for deployment of what could be boots on the ground. I refer to the 82nd Airborne. And finally, and this is significant with regard to Admiral Stav, from President Trump this morning on Truth Social, NATO nations have done absolutely nothing to help with the lunatic nation now militarily decimated of Iran. The USA needs nothing from NATO. But never forget this very important point in time, President Donald J. Trump. Admiral James Stavridis is a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, in addition to many other accomplishments. Admiral, welcome back. Can we start with the President's Truth Social posting this morning, the sort of the broadside at NATO? What do you make of it?
I think it is his frustration that in some sense, NATO hasn't rallied to the cause and sent fighters and integrated completely in this battle. But if he understood NATO, he would realize that's a non-starter. NATO is a defensive alliance, so this particular conflict started by the United States attacking Iran. It was not defensive in nature, so it's difficult to see how NATO could jump into this. But let me give you a more sensible way to approach this for the administration. It would be to go to the European nations of NATO. There are 30 of them. They range from very big countries like Germany, France, and the United Kingdom down to tiny little countries like Luxembourg and Iceland. What the Trump administration should do is go to the larger European NATO nations and ask them in their national capacity to come and help us open the Strait of Hormuz. That is the capability they could bring. I think they would be willing to do that. It fits with the non-offensive nature, at least in the moment, of the Iranians. And so send the minesweepers, send the frigates, send the destroyers, send the naval liaison teams, and partner with the United States to open the Strait of Hormuz. I think that's where this one is going to land, and that's a sensible place.
How worried are you that President Trump is capable of and willing to pull out of NATO?
I don't think he would do that. There are a number of safeguards against that, including the fact that we're committed to it by treaty. So he would have to go to Congress and get the Congress to vote on pulling out. I think that is all unlikely. Now, as the president, he could simply say, as the leader of the executive branch, I will have nothing to do with NATO. He has it within his power to pull every single American soldier out of Europe. He could pull the Supreme Allied Commander, General Krinchevich, out. He could do a lot, as he has done in other issues. But I don't think he'll do that. I think he'll continue to rail at NATO. But this is where the European NATO nations have a choice to make. And I think they have already done one good thing, which is increase their defense spending. And in this particular situation with Iran, my advice would be pragmatic and go ahead and bring your naval and maritime assets to the Gulf and pitch in to open the straits. Again, I think that's probably how this ends.
Admiral, with regard to the 82nd Airborne and other troops that are either already positioned in the Middle East or headed in that direction, everybody wants to know, well, what will be their role? And two possibilities seem at the top of the list. One is securing the Strait of Hormuz. Secondly, a battle or somehow taking control of Kharg Island. You published for Bloomberg a detailed analysis, a great primer on the island. The 8 square miles are largely covered by enormous petroleum storage and piping complexes that move 90% of Iran's oil exports to sea from the mainland. What would be the play? Why militarily would the administration, the Pentagon more specifically, want to take control of this island?
Because it's the absolute dead center of the Iranian economy. They float quite literally on oil. And so 90% of their oil exports pass through that Kharg Island. They're loaded onto tankers that then sail the 350 miles south to the Strait of Hormuz. So if you could control that island and stop Iran exporting its oil, you would go a long way toward putting immense economic pressure on them. Now, having said all that, and as I point out in the article you reference in Bloomberg, it's a high-risk operation. It's the size of about a third of the size of the island of Manhattan. Coincidentally, it's about the size of the island of Iwo Jima. And in World War II, we had 17,000 Marines killed there taking that island. I don't think this would be that bloody because the Iranians haven't had that kind of time to dig in and prepare but certainly they are aware that Kharg is on the table. They're prepping defenses, and I think if the Marines go in there, the 82nd Airborne drops in there, we are going to take some significant casualties. So final thought, Michael, what I would advise is you don't have to actually seize the island. You could blockade it. You could put naval assets around it, and you could prevent anybody from coming in to get the oil or any oil from coming out. So I suspect that's another option that's being considered as well.
So the point is it's not to destroy it, it's to seize control and to bring their economy to a grinding halt in the process.
That's exactly right, with the knock-on idea that you don't want to permanently destroy all of their oil production facilities, because you're still in the back of your mind. You're thinking a year, 2 years, 3 years, this rotten theocracy is going to be overthrown by the people of Iran. I think that's part of it. And so when that moment comes, you want Iranian oil to be available to the people of Iran so they can rebuild their country under a different regime.
Admiral, in Bloomberg, you say the first challenge before even contemplating boots ashore on Kharg would be getting the MEU's ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Wait a minute. In other words, we need to go through the strait, maybe not necessarily, but I guess that's the most direct route. But do we need to control the strait before we even move on Kharg Island?
Well, we got to be able to get our Marines who are embarked on 3-ship MEUs. These are Marine Expeditionary Units. Each of them have 2,500 Marines, so that's 5,000 Marines. Yes, the Marines will have to go through the strait. Now, the 82nd Airborne wouldn't have to. They could parachute into Kharg Island, I suppose. They could also be transported across the Gulf with support from our partners in the region. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We need to be able to get transit through the Strait of Hormuz. And to do that, we're going to have to knock down the Iranian threat. Killing the head of the Iranian Naval Revolutionary Guard is a positive step. But we've really got to get after the mines. They have 5,000 mines. We've got to get after the ballistic missile short range, the artillery, the small boats, and above all, the drones. So we still have a lot of work to do before we can, if you will, permanently reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
And as you referenced in the Bloomberg piece, even if you do traverse the strait without significant loss, the next challenge, you say, would be getting to the northern part of the Gulf in the vicinity of Kharg. The Iranians would continue to pepper the ships with drone attacks and might use disguised merchant ships for surveillance and potentially for attacks.
They would do all of that. And I think people tend to conflate in their minds, oh, Kharg Island, it must be, right there next to the Strait of Hormuz. No, it's 350 miles away. That takes a while if you're in an amphibious ship that's going 20 miles an hour. So it is a long stretch where they would be targeted, our ships. And yes, the Iranians have a lot of capabilities. They could put mines immediately in front of those ships. They could use small boats to attack them. They could use drones, above all, would be my biggest worry. So once they're in the Gulf, they're in pretty constrained waters, and they're close to the Iranian coast, and they're vulnerable going up there. Again, all of that before you get to the hard part, which is actually putting the Marines ashore, seizing the island, containing the 20,000 Iranian workers who are there now, and then occupying the island. Again, that's why I think a blockade might be a better approach.
Okay, and thanks for permitting me so many questions about this, but I think it's really important. I had no idea of some of the issues that you addressed, so just one more, and you made reference to it. Quote, there are significant risks and potential pitfalls, you write. There are roughly 20,000 Iranians on the island, almost all civilian oil workers, who would need to be contained in their homes or evacuated. Is the 82nd Airborne or the Marines equipped to do that, to deal with so many civilians?
Nope. and that's a big part of the problem in my view. Now, we may see the Iranians evacuate the workers as a force gets closer, but again, if I'm the one-star general or the colonel in charge of the Marine Expeditionary Unit, or I'm Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of U.S. Central Command, the overall four-star commander, I'm keenly aware that I have responsibility for the sustainment, the food, the water, the medical, the care of all of those Iranians once I capture the island. That's a big burden to be placed on any ground force there. So again, I think it's a very difficult opportunity. I'll close with this, Michael. In addition to looking at Kharg Island, I'm seeing reports of looking at a different island. This is Kharg Island, which is actually in the Strait of Hormuz. We could seize that. It kind of acts as a toll master at the very top of the Strait of Hormuz. That would be another option. But again, all of these where you get into putting boots on the ground, be it on Kharg Island in the Strait or ashore to go after the uranium, all those are worthy military objectives, but they all carry high risk, boots on the ground.
Final question. Do you think something significant, momentous, is about to take place given that the Monday deadline was pushed off for 5 days?
My feeling is that President Trump is not a patient man. He's also an impulsive man. Whether you love President Trump or you dislike President Trump, I think all of us would agree that he is impulsive and prone to action and not very patient. So when I put that together, yes, I think that President Trump, through both back channel and through his overt commentary, Truth Social, Twitter, all of that, I think he is signaling the Iranians, let's get to the table or I am going to increase the military force. And, of course, what he put on the table 7 days ago, Michael, was going after the electric grid and the oil production facilities. That would cripple Iran as a society for many years. So he's got a big hammer, a big lever. I think he's going to use it to try and threaten them and get them to the table. Let's hope they come to the table.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much. The piece from Bloomberg, which I linked to, is really valuable, so insightful, and we're grateful to you for your expertise.
Thanks, Michael.
At Stavridis J, or admiralstav.com if you want more information on Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Interesting, right? In terms of we've got troops who are headed in that direction, 50,000 who are in the vicinity already, meaning the Middle East writ large. The deadline looming. Is it tomorrow night? Is it Friday night? Or is it Saturday? It was Monday at 7:44 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I would think. I just want to piggyback on something that the Admiral said at the end, which is that, yes, the president is both impatient and impulsive. I also think that the president is not someone who tolerates ridicule. And so the taco reference that Trump always chickens out, I think grates on him. I don't see him allowing, whether it's Friday night, whether it's Saturday night, I don't think he's going to continue to let the deadlines pass. A, because he'd lose credibility, right, in the court of public opinion or global opinion if he established deadlines, drew an Obama-Syrian red line in the sand and then didn't stand behind it. I don't think that he can afford to issue ultimatums and not deliver on them. And I also think that he doesn't want to be made fun of. Like, oh, he chickened out again. So where this goes in the next 48 hours, I don't know. But maybe you already realized this. I needed to look at a map and think about what Admiral Stavridis was speaking of. These MEUs that transport Marines, the only way they get to Kharg Island, which is 300 miles north of the Strait, is if they go through the Strait. The 82nd Airborne doesn't need to go through the Strait of Hormuz. So it seems as if there could be conflict at the Strait in the short-term future. We're now 4 weeks into this war with Iran, and in the last 24 hours, it has expanded again. For the first time since the war began, Iran-backed Houthi forces in Yemen have fired a missile toward Israel, opening a new front in the conflict. At the same time, at least 10 U.S. service members were wounded in an Iranian attack on a base in Saudi Arabia. And back here at home, markets are reacting in real time, the Dow falling again, down nearly 800 points in the latest session as oil prices continue to climb. Meanwhile, the U.S. military presence in the region is growing. More than 1,000 U.S. soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division are preparing to deploy to the Middle East, adding to 2 Marine expeditionary units now deploying or repositioning to the region, bringing thousands of Marines and sailors. Those moves suggest the Pentagon's contemplation of using ground troops in Iran. But just yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said there'd be no need to go beyond the airstrikes.
We can achieve all of our objectives with our ground troops, but we are always going to be prepared to give the president maximum optionality and maximum opportunity to adjust to contingencies should they emerge.
So on one hand, the administration building military capacity in the region, on the other, insisting it does not need to put U.S. troops on the ground. And that gets to the bigger question here because the timeline of this war keeps shifting. President Trump has repeatedly set deadlines for Iran to change course and then move them. The first deadline that he imposed was for 7:44 p.m. Eastern last Monday night for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face U.S. strikes on its energy infrastructure. But by Monday morning, before the markets opened, he backed off that deadline and put 5 days on the clock, causing oil prices to slide and stocks to rise. And then on Thursday, just minutes after the markets closed, following one of the worst days Wall Street has seen since the war began, President Trump announced his latest extension. He's done this before. Remember, back on February 19, he issued a verbal ultimatum to Iran during the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace. He said the world would find out if a, quote, meaningful deal was possible within probably 10 days. That set an informal deadline of March the 1st, but the U.S. and Israel struck 1 day prior on February 28. This is nothing new for President Trump, setting deadlines, then moving them, sometimes acting earlier, sometimes later, but rarely on the timeline that he first lays out. So set a reminder for April 6 at 8 p.m. Eastern, or not. You can call it incoherence or strategic ambiguity. The man marches to his own beat. Surely the Iranians get that by now. I want to know what you think. Go to my website at Smerconish.com. Answer today's poll question. Is President Trump bluffing with ground troops? Joining me now, CNN senior military analyst, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, good to see you. We're 4 weeks in now. Yemen's Houthis struck Israel for the first time since the war began. 10 Americans just injured at a Saudi base. More troops headed to the Middle East. The market's down. It's feeling like escalation, despite the president's desire to limit it to 4 to 6 weeks. Your thoughts?
He can still limit it to 4 to 6 weeks, but the chances of doing so are getting harder and harder. I think the Houthis starting to strike, if you will, that's going to become the Western Front of this war. That's another significant choke point because it controls the Suez Canal. So if you put Suez Canal closed alongside Strait of Hormuz closed, you've got an enormous gun pointed at the head of the global economy. So extremely worrisome. To the question of, is President Trump bluffing or not? Are ground troops inevitable or not? I think the point to be made is that the chances of using them, the option to use them that Secretary Rubio is talking about, is increasing. Is it inevitable that he'll use them? No. Is he bluffing? I don't think so. If we know one thing about President Trump, it's that he's unpredictable. So if I'm in Tehran, I'm concerned as I watch the level of ground force increase moving toward and in the region.
There's a perception, I think, in the media that we're putting tremendous troop concentrations in the Middle East. I read something online from a guy who writes provocatively, admittedly. His name is Ken Klipperstein. Just one quote. If you squint, an invasion seems inevitable, but look closer at the actual state of each force being sighted and a very different picture emerges. Your reaction?
It's not inevitable, obviously. Again, we know President Trump is unpredictable. He's also impatient. And ultimately, will he use those troops if he decides to? I think he will. I don't think it's a good idea from everything I see right now. But the point for Tehran is not to try and assess, is it inevitable or not? It's, is it possible? And so I think that troop increase that you're seeing is extremely significant. Inevitable, no. Possible, yes. More likely than it was 3 weeks ago, yes.
You wrote for Bloomberg this week and focused on Kharg Island. What's the value to the United States if we can control Kharg Island?
Quite simply, we can strangle the Iranian economy. 90% of their oil transships through that kind of 7 square mile patch in the northern reach of the Persian Gulf. So if you can control it, you can inevitably throttle the Iranian economy. That's a good thing. The question I think the Pentagon is wrestling with and trying to give the president the right set of options is, do you have to actually seize it and hold it? That's a significant military challenge, frankly. Or should you blockade it? Or could you go in and simply destroy it? You really have all three of those options. Which is the best is something the Pentagon's wrestling with, and the president will decide soon.
You are a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Here's something that the president said via Truth Social this week relative to NATO. NATO nations have done absolutely nothing to help with the lunatic nation, now military decimated, of Iran. The USA needs nothing from NATO, but never forget this very important point in time, President Donald J. Trump. If a NATO member initiates an attack, Admiral, and then draws return fire, is Article 5 kicking in?
It is if the initial attack is based on imminent threat, hostilities that nation believes are about to break out, which is the narrative the administration has used here. Then it would have to go to the North Atlantic Council. All the NATO countries come together and evaluate it. And if there's a collective decision that the initial round of strikes were done preemptively in the face of a standing threat, then I think there's a legal basis. I want to make a point about NATO that's important for people to remember. It is this. After 9/11, NATO responded. European NATO responded. They sent 50,000 troops ultimately to Afghanistan. They were under my command for 4 years. Hundreds of them died there. NATO has stood and delivered for the United States. I think in this crisis, you'll see them come at some point, perhaps from the sea, in order to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
What can our allies do, not NATO, our European allies, shy of NATO's full participation? What can the allies do relative to Iran?
Quite a bit. And in particular, two things I draw a line under. One are the mine-sweeping capabilities. Minesweepers, mine hunters, the Europeans are very good at this. Why? Because they have enclosed seas they have to deal with, Baltic Sea and the Mediterranean. There are standing NATO mine countermeasure groups that could be brought into this to help clear the strait. And then secondly, Michael, NATO maintains standing maritime forces. These are guided missile frigates, guided missile destroyers. They're an international force representing all of the nations of NATO. Those could also be brought in. It could be done under the NATO flag if it went through the process I described, or it could be done individually by the European nations. I think ultimately the Europeans will decide to participate in a strait clearing operation. We need their help.
Admiral James Stavridis, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. We appreciate you, Admiral. Thank you.
You bet.
New York Times White House and national security correspondent David Sanger has covered 5 U.S. presidents. He's also CNN's political and national security analyst. And his best-selling book, New Cold Wars, comes out in paperback on April 7. David joins me now. David, simple question, complex answer, I'm sure. Why hasn't Iran capitulated?
Well, Michael, I think the main reason is right now the Iranians think they're winning just by surviving, right? I mean, we've had 4 weeks as of today of attack on Iran by the most powerful force that the world has ever seen, the U.S. military. And their regime fundamentally still stands with different leaders and much of their leadership killed, much of their missile capability down. But just yesterday, as you indicated at the opening, they managed to do a strike on Saudi Arabia, get through air defenses, wipe out 2 or 3, we're still trying to figure it out, major American aircraft, and injure 10 to a dozen Americans who we hope and pray will be okay. And that's pretty remarkable 4 weeks in. But I think both sides are living in something of a sense of unreality here. I don't think the Iranians understand how long the U.S. staying power could be, or the possibilities if they take Kharg Island, as you were discussing with Admiral Stavridis and so forth. And I don't think that the U.S. understands that it would take a much larger effort in order to actually change the government of 92 million people and bring about that revolution that the president talked about on day one and hasn't mentioned much since.
You and I have spoken previously about the precision with which the U.S. military has operated. They've been able to hit their targets. Does that make it more or less likely that Iran is willing to relinquish its nuclear stockpile?
It's a really interesting question because so far the U.S. has not gone after that nuclear stockpile. Yesterday, Friday, we actually saw the Israelis begin to strike some nuclear targets, not the one where the uranium is buried deep underground, the one that we're most concerned about. But they have begun to take out other parts of the nuclear infrastructure. I think the Iranians have to consider the possibility that the longer this goes on, the more likely it is they're going to lose that entire stockpile. The question is, can there be a negotiation led, it seems, by Vice President Vance, if this could come together, in which the Iranians would give up that stockpile voluntarily? Either all of it or enough of it that the U.S. would know they wouldn't have enough around for one bomb. Remember, that's what happened in 2015 in the agreement with the Obama administration. You may like that agreement. You may think it's full of loopholes. It is full of loopholes. But at the end of the day, the Iranians agreed to give away 97% of all of the nuclear material they had. And if we could win an agreement like that, I'd say take it.
In my prior segment, I think that the chyron on the screen said incoherence or strategic ambiguity. From the perspective of the Iranians, they have no idea what they're going to get from President Trump relative to these deadlines, on again, off again, and so forth. It puts them in a precarious position of not being able to, we try and read the tea leaves here of our president, but from their standpoint in war, they have no idea what he'll do next.
They don't, and that certainly plays to President Trump's advantage, and I think he views this clearly as great strategic ambiguity. But I think the Iranians sense something else, that in the changing objectives that the president has articulated, starting with regime change, then it's not regime change, starting with degrading their missile capability and their military capability, and then saying the other day that they're desperate for a deal of some kind, which he seems willing to negotiate. I think they believe they have some more time and time on their side, that the more the markets decline, that the closer you get to the midterm elections, that the more painful this seems for the United States, that the president's interest in getting to that complete victory that he was talking about 2 weeks ago is probably going to diminish. Remember, it was March 7, now 3 weeks ago, that the president declared, we've already won. And, here we are about to go into April.
David Sanger, thank you as always for your contribution. And what are your thoughts at home? Hit me up on Truth Social. Hit me up on Truth Social, on X. You can hit me up on YouTube. Find me any way you can find me, and perhaps I'll be reading your comment on air. Bluffing? We finally have a real president again, so Mr. Trump is capable of evolving his position as new data emerge. I agree with Admiral Stavridis, Jeanette. I think it's a fair question to be asking as to whether the amassing of troops and the things that he said really are indicative of putting U.S. boots on the ground. But I agree with the way in which Admiral Stavridis articulated it just a couple of moments ago, which is to say the odds are increasing, and he's not a guy who's bluffing in this instance. I want to know what everybody else thinks. Go to my website at Smerconish.com and answer today's poll question. Is President Trump bluffing relative to ground troops? Up ahead, Meta Wealth versus mental health. What does that recent verdict in the lawsuit against social media mean for the rest of us? And sign up for my newsletter at Smerconish.com when you're voting on today's poll question, for which Steve Breen sketched this.